Hello, BookTube, and welcome to your Daily Penguin. It's a kind of a tour of my Penguin library shelf. I decided rather than do, all of them at a great gallop, we would do one at a time, with a penguin a day to keep the doctor away. And today we are doing a Penguin classic that epitomizes two things about Penguin classics, about classics just in general. Two things that are both in their own way noteworthy. This is the Oresteia of Aeschylus. So here you get the Agamemnon, you get the libation bearers, and you get the Eumenides. It's our only extant trilogy. The ancient Greeks were masters of stagecraft, and they did trilogies. That was the standard way, the standard traditional way that they did their stage plays. And we know this, but we don't have any except for this one. This is the only one we have, and even this one isn't complete. Because it used to be that you would pack people into those stone half-circle amphitheaters, maybe put awnings over their head, beautiful hot day, and you would put them through a whole trilogy that would harrow them right down to their souls and make them think and make them cry and make them terrified, all while the weather is changing overhead, all while the day is wearing on towards sunset. And then at the end of that process, when for instance in this case, when the Eumenides ends, the audience would be exhausted, not just physically from sitting there all day long, but also intellectually, emotionally exhausted. And then when you were done with that, the playwrights would craft a chaser. The number one rule in theater is in most circles of theater, leave them laughing. Send your audience out happy that they came. And the prototype of that rule in this case was that Greek trilogies like this ended with a kind of buffoonery. They ended with a kind of a comic send-up of the previous incredibly solemn trilogy that you had just seen. And the Oresteia had one of those things, but we only have a couple of lines from it. We don't have the whole thing. We have no idea what it said. But even so, even though this is not technically complete with that, it's still complete enough. It's still a trilogy. And it tells a complicated story, a Homeric story, a story that is actually alluded to right at the beginning of Homer's Iliad, or Homer's Odyssey. The Trojan War is almost over. The Trojan War has in fact ended, and all of the captains are heading back home, including the High King of Greece, Agamemnon. And he's bringing with him Cassandra, the Trojan princess, who was cursed by the god Apollo twofold. she fled from him. She resisted his godly importunings. And so he gave her the gift of prophecy and also cursed her that no one would ever believe her. And she is part of Agamemnon's booty from the war, so he brings her home. Now, unbeknownst to him, his queen, Clytemnestra, has been plotting this whole time to kill him, should he survive the war. She still blames him for the death of their daughter, Iphigenia. He sacrificed her in order to get good winds for the ships to go to Troy. And also, in the meantime, she has taken a lover who is related to Agamemnon and who also has a grudge to bear against Agamemnon. So the irony here, not lost on Aeschylus' original audience, is that Agamemnon survives the war in Troy only to head home to a viper's nest that he will not survive, doesn't live more than a few hours. He gets home, trods on some sacred tapestries, a total setup by his wife, and is promptly butchered in the bath. And Clytemnestra shows the bodies. It's an amazing moment. I feel sorry that most of the people listening to me right now will never get a chance to see the Oresteia performed, much less maybe even one play, much less the whole trilogy. But that moment in the Agamemnon, when Clytemnestra reveals the two bodies, because of course she kills Cassandra as well, is shocking. Just shocking. It retains its power even after 2,000 years. And this trilogy is brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. I love Aeschylus. I think he's incredible. He is raw and powerful and adult. I shouldn't use a word like adult because it has all sorts of connotations that I don't want. But I don't know of a better word. Multifaceted, uncompromising. He is all of those things in a way that Sophocles and especially Euripides are not. You can definitely tell. If you took his name off a play and you were at all familiar with the different voices of the only three that we have, all these great, talented Greeks, writing plays, entering local and national contests, having their work put to ditties and songs and barbershops and candy shops, having people know and write long treatises about them, and they're all gone. All of them completely gone. So that when we talk about Greek tragedy now in the 21st century, we're talking about three people. Three people. But I firmly believe that once you become a little bit familiar with these people, you could take Aeschylus' name off a play and know immediately whether or not it was him. And it's naturally we would revere this anyway. It is incredibly powerful because Agamemnon has a son. In fact, he has children. and his son, Orestes, is now faced with a horrible, absolutely horrible dilemma. Because if he avenges his father, he has to kill his mother. And both those things. One is sacredly enjoined on him by divine power, and the other is sacredly punished by divine power. He's damned either way. And the story is about that. The story, Agamemnon is barely in the Agamemnon. And it's mainly about Orestes. It's mainly about Clytemnestra and her lover and Orestes, and the plays go on from there as Orestes has to deal with these long, dark fantasy tendrils from what Aeschylus is clearly portraying as an older world. The march of this trilogy is from darkness into light. It's from mythology into present-day history. It's from vendetta into law, in the larger sense. And it's that makes it sound very bloodless. And the point I was trying to make is that it isn't. It's incredibly moving. Even in an English translation, it's incredibly moving. And we would revere it and study it anyway because it's one of only a tiny handful of Greek tragedies that we have. We know there was an ocean of them, and we have a tiny handful of them, and that's one of the elements that I wanted to talk about here, which is the classics. When you deal with the classics of the ancient world, you are dealing with ratios, pitiless ratios of destruction, just pitiless. And that comes across with Aeschylus more than with almost any other ancient figure, because he wrote well over 70 plays, and we have 7 of them, or 10 of them, something like that. A tiny fraction of all of Aeschylus that we have would easily fit in one paperback. You often do see it in one paperback. 7 plays out of close to 80. We know the titles of a lot of them. We know the basic plots of a lot of them. We know that a lot of them were extremely revered. Scholars have been saying, for centuries, imagine what it would be like if we knew from history that there was this playwright named Shakespeare, and we have Hamlet, and we have Julius Caesar, and we have Troilus and Cressida, and Two Gentlemen of Verona. But we know that he wrote something called King Lear. We just don't know anything about it. So that is one of the 2 elements involved in this particular Daily Penguin, is the brutality of that, of just missing that. We know we would revere and study this book anyway because it's one of so few, and because it's our only trilogy. It's our only intact trilogy. But in addition to that, we're not wrong to study this, and we're not wrong to venerate it, because this was venerated in its own day. This was written just a couple of years before Aeschylus died. And in 458, it won first place in the Dionysia, where a major contest in which it would have had a huge amount of heavyweight competition. So we know that it was revered in its own day. We're not wrong to study it. We're not wrong to revere it now. It's just the heartbreak that I'm talking about is that we don't know what else. We don't know what else. I always hope against hope, that somehow, somewhere in Iran, a box of codexes will be found, or something. Or maybe that the spectrographic analysis techniques will finally gain ground in scanning the buried and calcified libraries of places like Pompeii, where the whole works of Aeschylus would have been, where the whole works of Livy would have been, where all these works that we know in fragments, they were all there, and all of that stuff was buried and burned. Is there any way, through any kind of spectrographic analysis, that we can maybe recover what's on there? I don't have any idea. It seems to me that if we can determine whether or not an exoplanet millions of light years from here might have oxygen in its atmosphere, we might be able to recover a little bit of Aeschylus from Pompeii or Herculaneum. I would like that. But one way or another, that is one of the elements that I wanted to mention here in this trilogy. The reason that I mentioned that it's a journey from superstition into law is because there's only one way for Orestes to be saved from the Furies. The Furies are these divine beings who want to torment and punish someone if that someone kills his mother. In Orestes' case, he has no choice. He must avenge his father, even if it means killing his mother and being cursed. And that is not fair, and it's also not legal, and the reason that I mention it is because there's only one out that can happen here, and Aeschylus knew that as well as anybody. He knew it certainly as well as anybody in his audience. The only thing that will work to break a cycle that is governed by goddesses is with a more powerful goddess. And that is why critics forever and ever have been saying that the Eumenides has one of the most pronounced anticlimactic endings in all of literature. I don't myself agree with that, and I don't think that I think that Aeschylus would have been furious with that as a description of the end of the Eumenides. I think I am always blown away by it. But then again, I'm one of those weirdos that likes the end of Paradiso better than anything in the Inferno. But anyway, one of the aspects that I wanted to talk about for your Daily Penguin, to see how many of these you can take before you die of boredom. I'll wait. If the comments start turning, as they will, if they start turning from this is a great idea to, oh my God, do we really have to? then I'll ease up. But in the meantime, I love talking about these more than any other kinds of books. The classics, the canon, the dead canon that so many postmodernists today would like to chuck out with the bathwater, when these are the most alive books in the world. They wouldn't be here. Anyway, the one aspect of your Daily Penguin that I wanted to talk about, and these are going to crop up again as we go through this wall, day by day by day. One of those aspects was that, and that is the pitiless ratio of classic survival that we're going to see again with Propertius. We're going to see it with Catullus. We're going to see it with all of these ancient works. It'll be less obvious the further into the present day we go, but a lot of the ancient works, unfortunately, on the Penguin Wall are together. I'm not going to mix things up or I'll just duplicate them. So you can skip. If you have my permission to skip. But the other aspect of that we're going to talk about here for your Daily Penguin is much more specific to Penguin Classics, or really any reprint line. And that is what happens when they get a real prize, a real gem. It's not their goal. I don't mean this as a criticism of Penguin or Bantam or Signet or whatever. It's not their goal. The goal of these reprint houses is to take these classics, put them in a relatively inexpensive, relatively well-curated, mass-produced paperback and set them free in the general public. That is the goal of these reprint houses. And if you're going to do that, then you'll take any competent version that you can get, and sometimes not. Sometimes the versions won't be competent. God help us. We'll see some of those. Even in Penguin, we'll see some of those. In some other reprint houses, oh my God, the versions that they get is just a question of what they can afford. If you're a reprint house, you probably don't have a whole lot of money. So you'll do what you can. You'll take what you can afford. And if the price is too high, you'll go with what isn't. Classic example of that would be the Barnes & Noble reprint line. Barnes & Noble right now, the huge retail bookseller here in Boston, in America, has a terrific reprint line. Absolutely gorgeous. No, I'm not talking about the cheap paperbacks that they do, which is a whole other subject, because sometimes they commission original translations for those paperbacks. Those paperbacks, some of them are remarkable. They're just poorly made. I'm talking about their reprint line of gorgeous faux leather hardcover editions with the built-in bookmark and the gold gilt pages. Those volumes are real keeper volumes. They are amazing. But all the money goes into the design. There's no money left over for buying a really good edition or version of the book usually, which is why they're gorgeous volume. They have a one-volume Homer. It combines the Iliad and the Odyssey in one volume, but the translation is Butcher and Lang. The translation is notoriously awful and just has never been updated because it's the cheapest way. And the drama around that for editions is the other part of the Daily Penguin that I want to talk about today, because this Oresteia is Robert Fagles. And it was not their first Oresteia. Their first Oresteia is creaky and it's full of Edwardian neologisms. And it's not enjoyable at all. You cannot read. I forget even who did it. I don't think I have it anymore. But you cannot read the earlier Penguin Classic Oresteia and understand in any way why those crowds of people would go and sit all day to watch this. Not in any way. Fagles did this, and it was he did this in the 1960s, and it was a huge hit. People recognized right away that this was an astonishingly great translation of Aeschylus, just an astonishing version of the Oresteia. And the aspect of the Daily Penguin that I'm talking about today is that Penguin Classic got it. So the Penguin Classic of the Oresteia is by far the best translation of the Oresteia that there is. That won't always be true, which is why I have so many duplicate editions of things in this little room. And it's not just a question of translation. Sometimes there's an addition, just the notes, the introduction, whatnot, the particular volume that was chosen, the particular edition of a work, even if it's not translated. Sometimes there will be a much better version of that than the one that Penguin gets. And sometimes they get the great one. It's the luck of the draw, the luck of publishing, a question of money, question of editorial taste, whatever it is. In this particular case, the two come together perfectly because Fagles is a great translator of the Oresteia. Just fantastic. He does a brief preface to this translation in this volume. He does a brief preface that opens wonderfully. It's a little forward. My thanks to Aeschylus for his companionship, his rigors, and his kindness. I found him a burly, eloquent ghost with more human decency and strength than I could hope to equal. As I tried to approach him, I remembered what they said of the ghost of Hamlet's father, quote, "We do it wrong, being so majestical, to offer it the show of violence." Translation has its violent moments, and I suppose it must. It begins with attraction, then a kind of attack, and it ends, if you are lucky, with a strong impersonation of your author. Whatever the end, at any rate, it is meant to be a thing of love and homage. So in thanking that proud old spirit, I would also ask for his forbearance if he should ever hear what I have written in his name. And Fagles goes on to invoke John Dryden, whose famous comment about translation was that it should rather than be a word-for-word, line-for-line trot, it should translate the original into the best, most vigorous work of its own received language, which is what Fagles tries to do here. And his forward is just a page long, and then for 30 pages you get an essay of his about the Oresteia. And that is part and parcel with the translation. It's just part of that thing. So it was not excised. And it accounts for a significant chunk of the length of this volume. And it's really, really good, but it is not the same kind of translation that, for instance, Bernard Knox gives to Fagles' own translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey, where Bernard Knox is not so much interpreting the work as he is simply introducing it to you, telling you its history and whatnot. The Fagles introduction here is not. The essay that he gives here has elements of that, but it is very interpretive. And I've often wondered if that was the right idea, because these books are often pitched to school, to students and whatnot. But nevertheless, I love that essay. I reread it for the Daily Penguin, and I just loved it. So this is a case where those two things come together well. This is a Penguin Classic to have. This is not a case where, as we're going to see, when we do these Penguins, we're going to see there are plenty of Penguins where I have the Penguin, but I also have another edition, and the other edition is better. This is not one of those cases. This is the Oresteia to have. And it's I think the only Aeschylus that I have in a Penguin Classic. We shall see, because we're going to be doing a Daily Penguin tomorrow. But anyway, that's your Daily Penguin for today. This is the Oresteia by Aeschylus, who saw his city fall to the Persians, helped in the armed services against the Persians, was, even so, a beautiful poet, a beautiful playwright, and who wrote a magnificent trilogy, just a magnificent work. So we're 2 for 2. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.